Let's start off your reaction to what you heard from NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
Sorry, John, I was not impressed. Considering that NATO had 4.5 months warning when they saw Putin build up his 120 battle groups to invade the Ukraine, and considering that the Russian threat is still very much present, indeed even now more dangerous, I find NATO's response, according to what the Secretary General laid out, absolutely insufficient.
What do you think will be then the result of that?
Well, let's take a look at the numbers. Currently, there are 4 multinational battle groups, and they've doubled it to 8. Putin has 120 in Ukraine alone. There's already 100,000 U.S. troops in Europe. Bless them for being there, and bless them for sending tens of thousands over so quickly. But there's no real sense of how many additional will be sent, though the U.S. apparently is pre-positioning heavy equipment, flying it over and sending it by sea. There'll be 40,000 others, undefined and ill-defined. There'll be a little bit of nuclear, biological, chemical warfare support and crisis management. Actually, I think the last thing the Ukraine needs is expertise in crisis management, because they're pretty good at that. So where are we now? To be effective in solving complex problems, interstate dispute or war, you have diplomacy, you've got economics, you've got humanitarian support, you've got the military. Canada has been active in diplomacy. By the way, diplomacy obviously has failed, because otherwise Putin wouldn't have attacked. Economic, the sanctions, valuable, but they're not stopping the Russian battle groups from grinding away and essentially killing Ukraine citizens. Humanitarian support is after the fact, where you try to remediate the damage and the tragedy. We've done a good job bringing refugees to Canada. I'm told about 10,000 Ukrainians so far. So medical supplies, but on the military side, we are lacking. For 5 years, Canada did not allow the Ukraine to acquire weapons from Canada. That was a conscious government decision, because they were asking. And then when the push came to shove, 3 days before the attack, we sent a couple of boxes of weapons, and then some old anti-tank systems, and then some other stuff, and now we've stopped again. As well, we only have 600 troops in Europe right now, and we're talking of a need of multiple thousands. So to demonstrate leadership, we've got to do more, not just in the first 3 areas I mentioned, but also on the military side, because if we don't deter Putin, he may try something else.
Stoltenberg also referenced revisiting the issue, essentially, at the next NATO meeting in June. Now, do you read anything into that, either in terms of a lack of urgency or the expectation that this crisis is going to continue at least until June? Can you read anything more into that?
I can, John. It's a very good question to ask. I think there is a definite sense of urgency emerging, which has been sorely lacking, quite frankly, from NATO. And I'm disappointed in that structure, in which I served my first operational tour 39 years ago. And they have disappointed not only in terms of the profession, their knowledge of the situational awareness that led to this crisis, but in their response. In terms of meeting again in June, that's probably the next time when all the national leaders can convene in person. But there better be some more high-level discussions, because right now, in my professional and personal opinion, what they have offered is insufficient to act as a viable deterrent to Russia.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed NATO again in a video presentation. He repeated his request for aid. He said that Ukraine matters. At this point, and you've partially answered that, I think, but just to put a button on it, do you think that NATO is doing everything it can do to support Ukraine? And if not, what more should it do that will be taken seriously by Vladimir Putin?
On the flip side, I think that NATO's response is severely constrained, and quite logically so, because Putin has made a series of very bad choices. He's overestimated his own capacities and abilities and that of his army. He's frustrated, he's angry that the attack into Ukraine is not going as perhaps he'd planned or hoped. So he's frustrated, and he's also threatened to use nuclear or chemical weapons. So that's a constraint, which tragically for Ukraine, NATO really can't get beyond, because if things go badly wrong in a series of calculations that Putin or NATO might make, then you could have multiple nuclear exchanges, which could devastate indeed not only Europe, but the rest of the globe. In terms of low-level stuff that NATO is currently providing to the Ukraine, anti-tank systems, anti-aircraft systems, a variety of weapon systems, that's all good. I think really the capacity of the Ukraine to absorb that could be, I think they're doing a good job with what they're getting. They probably need more. Canada has stopped sending weapons to Ukraine. There's no reason why we couldn't be buying Stingers and Javelins. By the way, the Canadian Army also needs those systems because we don't have them. And maybe sending half of the bunch at a time to Ukraine while we equip our own forces in Europe or something creative like that. But Canada should be doing much more than it's doing now. Canada should be demonstrating that they understand the application and the utility of military force as a deterrent, and quite frankly, not pinning all their hopes on diplomacy, economic sanction, or humanitarian support. When the check comes due, and it's coming due, now is not the time to go to the washroom, to quote John Manley.
Pardon me, we've only got about 30 seconds left, but I do want to ask you this in terms of the call for NATO members to increase their military spending. Canada has signaled it might want to do that. Do you think it will? To what extent? And will that be enough at this stage, fast enough to help Ukraine? I'm sorry, it's very quick.
After shirking that responsibility for decades, I sincerely hope that the current government does step up to the plate. Currently, about 21 or 22 billion is allocated. 20% would obviously double, would be half of that again. So it would be about 30 to 35 billion a year. But we need money spent now to get equipment now, overseas now. Notice the emphasis on now.